What is up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo football podcast. I've set it up for 5 o'clock, then we moved it back to 6, then we moved it to 7. Apologies for the delay. Honestly, the Bills did probably 2.5 hours worth of media today, and just parsing through everything, getting through all of it has been a little bit of an undertaking, but a lot to come. If you want to become a Shout Bills insider, this is probably the best time. Brandon Bean did another 40-minute scrum with a couple of us reporters after. I want to send a rundown of all of that. And it almost served as more of a traditional season-ending press conference where we got to get into some more nitty-gritty roster stuff, off-season outlook, position, some free agency stuff, all that stuff. So 716-528-6727. Become an insider. You'll get a rundown on that after the show. Ryan Talbot, it is the introduction of Joe Brady as head coach of the Buffalo Bills. And I don't know, some comments about the headline of the episode here. I thought he really hit it out of the park in a lot of different ways. And my read on the fan base from social media through the text line, everything like that, like it feels like a lot of fans feel a sense of, I don't want to call it relief, but energy around what they heard and saw from Joe today.
Yeah, I thought he was well prepared. I thought all of his answers were well received by the media, by the fan base. And, you know, there are some people kind of scoffing at that, saying, well, it was a press conference. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. We're not that far removed from the Brandon Bean, Terry Pagula press conference where they had a day or so to prepare for that. And it was night and day from that one. So very impressed with everything Joe Brady had to say today. He hit all the right notes, thanking Sean McDermott, giving him a real nice goodbye. The players, the family part, getting emotional. I thought he did a great job. Obviously, again, yes, just a press conference. But for your first impression of Joe Brady, the head coach, I thought he did a fantastic job.
Yeah, and I think, like, if we just take into focus here his opening statements before he even started taking questions. I mean, fighting through some of the emotional part of it. It is emotional. I mean, just to set the scene of that room, I mean, you have almost the entire Buffalo Bills operation in the field house weight room, right? They put up a stage there. They had these two huge projectors. They probably had about 120 seats. So you have all of the big time players in the front row, including Josh Allen, Spencer Brown, Dalton Kincaid. And then on the second level where they have all of the bikes, it's literally like support staff all the way across. So you probably had somewhere around 100 Bills employees there. And as he's kind of going through all of this, and, you know, the emotions are kind of getting the better of him at a few times, I thought he spoke really well. And he was, the thing to me that stood out the most about it was he's not running away from the expectations that he's stepping into. Like, when you move on from a coach and you take that job, who had all the success that Sean McDermott had, you're entering, like, you know, a very pressure-packed position. And I think embracing that from the jump, I think, was a very important piece to all this. He didn't even have to be asked about, you know, how
Right.
much of a pressure-filled job this is going to be. He knows it. He wants it. And I think he also communicated how important it is to him to win a Super Bowl for Buffalo, for the Pagula family, all of those kinds of key notes that you wanted him to hit, and he hit it.
Yeah, you know, there was one question about getting over the hump and things like that, and he acknowledged his own shortcomings, which I really respected. There's been a few times where we've had the ball in our hands and I wasn't able to get it done for this team, and I like that. There was no deflecting it. There was no putting the blame on anyone else or avoiding of that question. He knows that there's been a few opportunities for this team to go deeper into the playoffs, and they haven't been able to do that, but he's also helped guide this team. There were some really interesting quotes from Joe Brady, from players throughout this whole press conference today and after that I can't wait to get into.
Yeah, so on the Sean McDermott front, I thought that was really – I saw a bunch of fans note that it was good of Brady to come right out and give that kind of love to him, because the organization didn't. I felt like in so many different ways – Brady cleaned up a couple of the PR missteps by the Bills.
Sure.
over the last week and a half with his performance today, not just in this session, but what we're going to get into in a few minutes of the secondary session that wasn't taped. It was just with the print media, and some stuff on Keon Coleman that I thought was definitely worth some applause with the way that he's handling that whole situation. But through the love shared for Sean McDermott and what he's meant to him, he did also turn around and say at the same time, we've got to move forward. And he said, I think it starts with a new energy, a new mentality, and a new vision. He's never going to take a shot at his former coach. Brandon Beane, even if there was a disconnect at the end, he's not going to come out and take a shot at the former coach either. But to me, reading through trying to see the forest through the trees here, it feels like they needed something different, right? There is a young energy that comes with Joe Brady, and he is entering at a different stage of this thing and at a different time, much different than the team that Sean McDermott had to come in and try to coach. He's getting to walk in the door, and it's a Super Bowl contender handed to you because of the quarterback. It's a much different situation. But I think that the parts of this operation over the last 2 seasons since Joe Brady took over as offensive coordinator, we talked about this on the last one, the offense has been the part of this thing consistently, and you can poke holes through the playoff performances, and we have, that I think has consistently been pretty good. I think it's really going to come down to who he's able to tab, I should say, as the defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I thought there's a really interesting quote in his press conference, and I'm going to read it today from today. It says, the biggest thing for me is you have to surround your system with the players that you have. So he didn't come right out and say, I didn't have the right personnel to do what I wanted to do, but in a way kind of pointing out, we may not have had the right personnel in terms of what my true vision of this offense is. And I think there's something to be said about that, because this offense looked completely different the last few weeks once Brandon Cooks got acclimated to it, got used to it. They were stretching the field more. They were a little bit more pass happy down the field, which they had not been for most of the year. And I'm not sitting here saying that Cooks is enough to get the job done in 2026 and beyond, but I think the Bills now realize, or Bills fans should realize, they're going to go out and they're going to make a move for a true number one receiver. And we really haven't seen necessarily what Joe Brady's true offense is, what he envisions it to be, because he had to work with the personnel that he had. And one other thing, Matt, because you mentioned the energy, Joe Brady talking about bringing the energy and that culture. And there was a quote a week or so ago about Josh Allen wanting to be the guy that tells dick jokes and be goofy and fool around. Alec Anderson kind of said something today too that I thought was pretty noteworthy for a player to say. And it was, he wants us to know that we don't have to have our assholes so tight around him all the time. We can walk around and be our personalities. So again, this is not a bash Sean McDermott session, but I think Sean McDermott was buttoned up. I think he expected things to be a certain way. And for some players, they couldn't necessarily let their true personalities out, where I think they feel like around Joe Brady, a 38-year-old, a young, energetic guy, might have a similar sense of humor and personality, that they can be their true, the true version of themselves.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because there's something, this is not one sourced comment. I've had probably, Ryan, with people that have been in the Bills organization before, that are now folks around the NFL. I've been having conversations over the last week and a half with people from all over the different spaces. The people that I've talked to that have had any connection to this Bills team over the last couple of years, there's been a tightness inside the building. And the tightness, I think, comes from the inability to get over the hump in these big moments. And it almost becomes a character trait after a while. It's how you operate organizationally. And so when that's happening, like take Sean McDermott, for instance, like year after year, he's had to kind of shoulder the burden, and a lot of it rightfully so, for not getting over the hump. And I think that constant state of having to, explain yourself and try not to, have any missteps at any different time, it creates an organizational identity in a lot of ways.
Right.
And so what I think we're seeing today, talking about this new energy and this new vision and alignment, is that everybody's kind of pulling in the same direction. My sense is like Sean McDermott probably was not moving in the same direction as a lot of other people, because eventually he probably felt like he was going to be the fall guy, like he eventually was. In this league, after so long, the coach is going to take the brunt of the responsibility, and that's what ended up happening. And I think even what we heard from Josh Allen today is that, sure, he was gutted for Sean McDermott, felt like he had a role in it for his performance in Denver. But he said that at the same time, he said, I fully and truly believe in the direction and the vision of this organization. And I just think that Brady's entire way of going about the job is going to be something that really refreshes the building in a way that I just don't think Sean McDermott going into year 10 with all of the, playoff failures past, having to kind of, get everybody back to a place where you're putting all that stuff out of your mind. Like, that kind of stuff comes up. We've all played competitive sports, right?
Yeah.
Like when you've lost a game, you remember those moments and you remember who did what in those games. I feel like this is going to be maybe a chance to reset the deck, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that'll be something that I'm looking at. I think some of the points in here, though, Ryan, that I think we also have to talk about, it's okay if you're not all in at this point.
Right.
Let's not get this twisted. There's a lot that needs to be proven over the next couple of months from a front office perspective. And then, of course, on the other side, from a coaching perspective, like, what does this look like when the balls get rolled out at St. John Fisher and when the games start happening and early in the season? How many times do the Bills come out to a 4-0, 3-1, hot start in a regular season? Like, what happens if Joe Brady comes out and he's 0-2 in his first couple games? The offense is looking funny. People are talking about him. There's so many things that can happen. I'm just saying, as of right now, where things were a week and a half ago to right now, I think that Joe Brady did a lot of surgery on the image, the public image of the Buffalo Bills today. And I thought he hit it out of the park.
I agree with that. And yeah, we don't know what this is going to look like once the games are played. This is a first-time head coach. This is going to be somewhat different, but he does get to continue on with his scheme, with his system, potentially with some new additional weapons, maybe upgrading what they have. And considering they've been a top 10 unit with the roster that he's had the last 2 years, I think fans should be a little bit excited about the fact that it could look even better if you can add a true wide receiver one into the mix there, and what this defense can look like potentially too. And we don't know who the defensive coordinator is going to be just yet. Obviously, there's interest in Jim Leonard, but there is interest from the Chargers before they landed a DC. There's interest from the Ravens in Jim Leonard. So it might not be Leonard. There's other names out there, some interesting names for that matter. But, get this defense going, something a little bit different, maybe a more aggressive and attacking type of defense that was talked about today. Because if you're looking at the two teams that are in the Super Bowl this up in a week and a half or so, you're talking about two teams that have had elite defenses this year come playoff time, and Seattle's been all season long for that matter. But Josh Allen's never had anything close to that, where the opposing team gets held to 7 points in the championship game, and give him a halfway decent defense with this new version of this team, and the Bills aren't going to have to worry about putting up 30 plus points and all that pressure that would be on Allen's shoulders, or what feels like is on his shoulders year in and year out.
You know what made Joe Brady probably the most uncomfortable about today's event?
What's
the fact that he had to wear a suit all
Yep.
day because he couldn't wear his trademark black T-shirt and black shorts that he comes in. Dude, this guy goes out there early in the morning at 1:00 games. He's walking around the stadium in his shorts in the middle of a Buffalo winter. I mean, he's got some toughness for a Florida guy. Like, to be able to do that, like, I'm telling you, I came back from Vegas and I am just such a wimp when it comes to all that stuff. So, he wasn't truly comfortable in the suit, but I felt like, he definitely played the role and at least made you feel like confident in his ability to be competent moving into this position. And I think that there's a lot of belief from Josh Allen, and we can sit here and argue about the level of input Allen should have had into this, what kind of coach Joe Brady is going to be to Josh Allen, if they're going to have the hard conversation. We're going to flesh out all of these conversations over the next couple of months and into the season. But I just think for today, when people are asking in the comments here, like, what did Joe Brady do to fix the image? The entire country was laughing at Terry Pagula last week, was talking about the ineptitude of an organization that would fire a coach, not put out a statement, do all these kinds of things. And now we're sitting here after today's event, and I got text messages from people that were down on this move a couple of days ago, and maybe they're not completely 100% sold on it, but to be able to have somebody step to the podium and talk about how they envision this thing and the collaboration that they're planning to. And that's another thing, the alignment, the collaboration. We talked about this before the start here, and this is probably a good transition point. Reading between the lines here, I think collaboration became a real problem at the end of the Sean McDermott era, from a scouting perspective, from a player acquisition perspective, and then even more so maybe on how you deploy the roster on the other side of the 53-man cutdown. Like, that to me was the message more than anything today from Joe Brady, is that I'm going to work tirelessly with Brandon Beane to make sure that we are in alignment with who are the players that we want to bring in and a plan for them on the other side of these things, which I was trying to get to all of this last year, but Brandon and Sean didn't really want to get too far into the weeds on these questions at the owners' meetings and the combine. And I'm starting to sit back and wonder, maybe there was a reason why.
Right. So first of all, real quick on the suit comment, it's funny. My mom called me this afternoon and said, "Well, what did you think of the press conference?" No, I think he did well. What did you think? She says, "Well, I think he kind of looks funny in a suit. I'm so used to seeing him in the shorts and everyone's kind of used to that image of him and not the buttoned up suit guy." So I think that is definitely something the fan base acknowledged and saw today too. But alignment was the word of the day. I mean, I think he said the word alignment like 4 times in a matter of 2 minutes at one point. And you're right. It goes back to maybe that relationship had just kind of run its course and things had become a little strained at times, because one thing that they said about alignment is it doesn't mean agreeing on everything. It's a shared vision of what we want. And maybe they were just really having trouble coming up with that shared vision in these last few years, that being Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, because you're right. It felt like they danced around that topic at times last year. It felt like there were some, you don't want to use the word shots, but with Sean McDermott talking about Jacoby Myers and talking about how when they lost Jamarcus Ingram and things like that. Maybe they weren't completely in lockstep on those decisions, and that vision got a little bit blurred. Now it's back to being together with Joe Brady, Brandon Beane. What does this team need? Obviously, on offense, we've talked about the wide receiver. What does this defense need? Obviously, that'll depend on who they hire as the DC, whether it's a different type of front. If you potentially go with like Jim Leonard, and Leonard might not jump right out of the gate with an odd number front, but over time, you'd like to probably have that personnel or enough of that personnel to shift and be multiple. If Jim Schwartz becomes available, that's another intriguing name, someone that's been here, more of an even front. So it's all dependent on who comes in as that DC. But I think they're going to say, okay, these are our needs, and here's how we have to address them.
Got a bunch of people watching here on Thursday night. Sorry for the delay. I know the Sabres are on right now. I'm going to actually head up and watch that after we're done with this. A lot to come over the next week, Ryan. So I've already started to really dive deep into some of the Senior Bowl folks. I'll probably put up a story at some point over the next 48 hours about some of the Senior Bowl standouts that Bills fans have to start getting on their radar as we look to next month in the scouting combine, and some of the guys we're going to be able to really sink our teeth into. And then we'll start to put together some big picture like roster ideas for how this thing is going to shake out. One interesting thing that Brandon said, I said we spent about 40 minutes with him. He was talking about David Edwards and Connor McGovern and the fact that they're both going to be free agents. And he kind of said like a line like, I'm hopeful that I can get one of them back, which there you go. Like that probably sets up what I think most of us were thinking in terms of the kind of run that they can make at those two linemen. And then it comes down to which one. And that's going to be a tough call. And you have to prepare for, if those two guys aren't back, who do you have on the roster that can play? And, he liked what he saw from Cedric Van Pran-Granger in the Jets game, more so than he saw from him in the last game last year. But he said either way, if they lose both of those guys and they have these young guys like Alec Anderson and Tylen Grable and Van Pran-Granger, they're very much going to have to bring in competition. And he believes in his scouting staff. I mean, listen, they went out and they brought in David Edwards and Connor McGovern, and those were very unheralded additions. And so I think what their pro scouting department has been able to do is find talented free agents, offensive linemen that have come in and be, pieces for them. I mean, it started with Mitch Borns back in 2019. I think Darrell Williams had a nice run for a little while.
Mhm.
They've had a bunch of different pieces on that line. I mean, I even go back to John Feliciano. I know it didn't end as well for him as fans would have liked, and that whole back and forth, but I thought he was very much useful for them in his tenure. They've done a good job on their offensive line.
Absolutely. I mean, when they brought in David Edwards, for example, he was coming off of a concussion. He wasn't the most sought after guy. And we saw how well he played over the last few years. And some of these UDFAs and draft picks that they've brought in and developed, they're going to bring in some veterans in free agency as well to kind of compete and potentially, if they don't make the roster, be that veteran on the practice squad. They always really bolster that offensive line. But it's funny, you mentioned Van Pran-Granger. He was working out in that weight room today.
He was hitting pads too. He was doing some MMA training or something.
I mean, he's someone that he's dealt with some injuries early in his career. It put him a little bit behind the eight ball in terms of not necessarily winning a job. When he was first drafted, I thought maybe an outside shot. He wins that. McGovern moves over to a guard spot, but that never even came close to fruition. But at Georgia, he was a dominating offensive lineman and just dominant across the board. So I would like to see what this could potentially look like if the Bills can afford to bring both guys back. And they do have many players waiting in the wings that they could potentially play along that line.
We got a couple super chats here, so I want to make sure we get to that. You know the drill. If best way to get a comment on the show, you could text us on the text line, which is an easy one, or right here on the super chat line. They pop up right away. And even if I don't get them on the screen right away as we're talking, I'll always get them into the show as we go. David, who is not necessarily the biggest fan of Joe Brady, it appears in the comments, one of our regulars. So if that was a shot at the wide receivers needed, talking about Brady's comments, right? Does this mean Bean has evolved on this? Does it matter if Brady wants A, but Bean wants B? What are your thoughts on that? So I think this is a great transition point to talk about the Keon Coleman story.
Okay.
And so unprompted, well, I shouldn't say unprompted, because he was asked about the Keon Coleman situation and where he kind of falls on that. And Joe Brady wasted no time when he was asked about it. And he basically said with his chest, I stood on the table to draft Keon Coleman. So if you remember last week, Terry Pagula kind of outed the coaching staff, quote unquote, for really wanting Keon Coleman, maybe even more so than where Brandon Beane had him on his board. Not that he wouldn't have drafted him, but maybe not there. Maybe he had guys higher on his board. Beane, knowing the Bills needed a wide receiver, and this group felt so strongly about Keon, pulled the trigger. And Brady said today, that was me. And Keon Coleman is not done as a Buffalo Bill. He believes in him moving forward. Basically said, he had to go through what he went through this year, but that doesn't mean that we don't think he has the ability to kind of still be the guy that we drafted him to be. And for me, I think that also what he said about this was important, in that you got to go back to your process sometimes and figure out, okay, that was the first draft, the first offseason for Joe Brady in his new role as full-time offensive coordinator. And maybe, the need for wide receiver in that moment, because they just moved on from Stephon Diggs, Ryan. The trade had just happened a month earlier. And so if this is somebody that you fell in love with through the process, maybe that is something that forces you to evaluate what Joe Brady called the root of your process and trying to figure out all these things. And that's what he said is going to be the most important part about this alignment, is that they're going to go back and study what worked and what didn't and try to figure out if they can improve their process moving forward. But even with all that said, he still believes that Keon Coleman is going to work out. So I think, listen, the guy had Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson at LSU. I can't imagine he doesn't know how to evaluate the position as a former wide receiver. And maybe there is something more that's untapped in Keon Coleman. And you wonder how much maybe that was more of a Sean McDermott thing than a Joe Brady thing, given the fact that the new head coach, with all eyes on him, is saying with his chest, oh, don't give up on Keon Coleman yet.
Right. Pretty much saying that he even told Keon Coleman, the best thing that can happen to you is if I get this head coaching job, in terms of really believing in him, getting the best out of him. And who knows? I don't want to speculate on in terms of who said what, but ever since Keon Coleman was drafted, all we have heard, Matt, is he was going to be the X receiver on this team. And obviously Bean said that a lot after the draft as the GM, and they needed that spot filled after the Diggs trade. There's some issues there, but all the draft analysts said the best way to use him is in the slot. Let him be a big slot. Maybe Brady's going to lean into that a little bit this year and let him play some type of slot role from time to time, and get a better season out of him, get some confidence built up there, find ways to utilize him better. So I'm intrigued by that. I think that Brandon Bean definitely realizes they need to upgrade their overall wide receiver room. However, I also, to his credit, I think his hands were tied a little bit since the Stephon Diggs trade, the dead cap, what the Bills had to work with. They tried going out there and signing those mid-level free agents in Curtis Samuel and Joshua Palmer, and they have not worked yet. I don't think necessarily Samuel will be back, but Palmer, with the way his contract's built, I would assume will return, and maybe you can get more out of him in year two. But this team certainly needs an upgrade at that position, but I think Keon Coleman got a little bit of a reset today in terms of, okay, this is far from over with him being on the Bills. He's going to get a legitimate shot to contribute in 2026.
I always try to contribute around the house, Ryan, as much as I can. My wife probably always wishes I would contribute more, but if we're hosting a big party, I always make sure to get to the store and do the big shop, right? And everybody's kind of planning that over the next week or so, getting ready for Super Bowl Sunday, the big game. You got to go shopping. You got to bring in all the good stuff. You got to head over to Tops Friendly Markets where they have ready-to-serve fan favorites. This playoff season, let Tops do the cooking, and you'll be the MVP. Visit takeoutmeals.topsmarkets.com and elevate your food game with a great selection of custom cakes, desserts, pizzas, sandwiches, fresh fruit, cheese trays, fried chicken, and so much more. Ryan, I was a little bit crazy with my daughter last night.
I saw that.
We were driving around, and I was like, you know what? She wanted some ice cream in the middle of a blizzard. So we pulled up the Tops, got a nice little carton of cookies and cream. And I just got home. I walked through the door. They were crushing it again tonight. So, listen, Tops has got you covered, man.
I'm afraid Caitlin might be laughing at you in terms of helping when it comes to the parties in the comments here, Matt. She might be calling your bluff. I'm just gonna mention that right now. Hard to miss in the commentary there, but head over to Tops this weekend. Royal Rumble Saturday. Head over next weekend. Super Bowl Sunday. Can never go wrong with going to Tops, getting everything for your party needs.
She's laughing. She's not laughing at that. She loved my transition, I think.
Oh, that's
gonna explain it a little bit better. Okay, anyway, moving on. Let's get off of that as fast as possible. So let me just see if I can pull this up here. So we were talking to Brandon, I said, right? I'm going to read this part, and I'm wondering if there isn't maybe a little bit more Keon in the slot in his future, because I think that maybe that's something that on the inside now in the room and some of the conversations that they were having probably at season ending, like meetings and everything like that, if that's not something where they think he can be a little bit more, useful. So let me see if I can pull this quote up. And this is going to be hard to do on the fly. It's probably be better to do in an episode in the next couple of days, because I want to go back through the entire thing. But he, what do you do with Khalil Shakir? That's always going to be the question. But I think if being in the slot is the best place for Keon to find success, at least some of the time, to get him involved in games, you at this stage of his career, Khalil Shakir, he's much more versatile than I even think Joe Brady uses him to be.
Right.
So I think if you can get Keon in the slot early, get him involved, get him some catches, then you could start to really tap into some creativity as a play caller. And I think Bean maybe insinuated that that's something that they might start to look into.
And I think that's exciting. And the way you can line them up, heck, you could pretend to throw the quick screen out to Shakir and then rifle a pass across the middle to Keon Coleman with that size and frame. You would like to believe that he'd be able to haul that in and make a play for you all over the field, essentially, not just like deep in the red zone. But I think in the red zone, using him as that big slot could be beneficial for him in his career. So I'm excited to see where this goes. No one's sitting here thinking that he's just suddenly going to emerge as this top flight wide receiver, but I think you can get a lot more out of him than the Bills have in their first 2 years.
So I got the quote here. So Keon Coleman can still play. I think you can also look at coming up with some routes, which we've talked about, not just make him an outside guy, get him inside. A lot of, if you go and look at Keenan Allen's production, and that's somebody that he kind of compared Keenan Allen and Keon Coleman as kind of similar ways that they play and win. He could play outside too, but a lot of his production comes from the inside, his instincts, his route craft, route feel, all of those things, and knowing how to set guys up. So I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to watch now as we move into the third training camp for Keon Coleman. That's where it felt like it was taken off for him was in training camp last year. Can he maybe start to explore some potential inside in camp? That'll be interesting.
Yeah, something to watch at St. John Fisher University when we're there in the summertime. I think that the Bills are going to be open to it.
You could take this super chat here, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Up for you. I was like, lobbing it.
3, 2, 1. Again, Bean leave. Okay, and like believe Brady is the man. Alignment is key. I think he always wanted to be an aggressive coach, and he may have been held back. Defensive coach choice will follow that same alignment. Aggressive. I agree. He sounded like someone that for the last 2 years was using the offense that maybe the head coach wanted. And that doesn't mean he's going to go away from the run. He knows what an asset he has in James Cook. And even behind that with Ty Johnson and Ray Davis. But I think there is more vertical passing game and stretching the field that he's maybe wanted to do. And certain matchups where maybe they wanted to throw the ball more. I think you will see a more aggressive Bills offense. It wasn't lost on me that he mentioned he came from the Sean Payton coaching tree. And, maybe you can be a little bit too aggressive if you're Sean Payton. There's a reason they're at home right now and could have gone up 10-0 in that game. And at least that would have been enough to go to overtime with how things shook out. But I think you'll see a much different offense in terms of their aggressiveness. And he wants the same thing on defense. We'll see who they ultimately land for that role. You hope that Jim Leonard, based on what I saw for him do at Wisconsin, obviously, not as much at the NFL level as he has been on an ascension though in Denver with what he's been doing there. I'd like to see what that would look like at the NFL level.
Boom Boom Bouchard in the super chat section. Carnell Tate, Jordan Tyson, Makai Lemon. What are your thoughts? I'm on the aggressive train in the draft. Any of those three guys, you're probably going to have to get up into probably around 12 to 15 range to probably be in line to grab one of those guys. In a world where maybe Jordan Tyson's injury issues pop up, maybe he slips to around 20 or something like that. But it feels right now, just in my initial leap into the draft world, that those three guys are the bona fide top three in this draft. And those guys tend to go high. So I think you're going to have to get ultra aggressive. Where do the Bills have those guys on their board? But I do think, to me, even if it's some next year draft capital, if you're totally sold on the prospect, it's worth pulling the trigger because of the advantageous nature of the contract on the other side. You don't have to pay top dollar by trading for a Justin Jefferson or something like that. I know it's established. I'm not necessarily even saying that's a bad idea if you could figure it out financially. But what I do know is if you can get one of these young, really good wide receivers and fill a need on in your roster, I don't even know if you need to go to the other end of the pool and go like get a bona fide, like top of the league number one, like a Justin Jefferson. I just think you need to get more talent in that room somehow. I've argued for the Green Bay model for a couple of years now. They've just been drafting guys. And what have they landed on? Guys that are really good when they're all healthy and out there. Now, Christian Watson has struggled to stay healthy. Romeo Dobbs at times as well. Even Jaden Reed this year. So sometimes you're going to deal with that. But I think it's about adding more weapons in that room and getting to an uncomfortable place in August where you might have to make some tough cuts.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I don't think we're going to be sitting here talking about acquiring Chase or even Jefferson in trades, the dead cap. Chase is going nowhere, obviously. In Cincinnati, Jefferson, you might be unhappy in Minnesota, but 70 plus million in dead cap, I believe, is what I've been told. So I don't see that either. But even like a DJ Moore, something like that, who has the, he is a number one wide receiver. He may not be the top of the top, but he's still a very good receiver in this league, and you can upgrade there and then go in the draft. The names that Mark mentioned are all intriguing guys. Tate even coming out recently saying he'd love to catch passes from Josh Allen. I'll throw Denzel Boston from Washington into that mix as well. Another guy I wouldn't mind seeing it, in round one. You wouldn't have to make necessarily an aggressive trade up for him either, and you could keep most of your draft capital. So I think there are guys in this draft, even on day two, which we'll get into when we talk more draft stuff than anything else. I don't want to turn this into a draft episode just yet, but yeah, acquire a few guys, bring in someone via trade. Free agency will be tough because that just gets into a bidding war, and the Bills aren't in the best place cap wise, but stranger things have happened there as well.
We got some more super chats here. Anthony on YouTube, Jim Schwartz or Jim Leonard. That's all I need to get back in on this team. So, the defensive coordinator hire is going to sway a lot of people that,
right.
Maybe today was a start for you and you're starting to kind of come around on the direction and everything like that. But the defensive coordinator, I've maintained through this whole process, is just as important as the head coach hire. Because if you're bringing an offensive mind, which Joe Brady is, you're going to need somebody that you trust on the other side of the ball. I'm very high on Raheem Morris. If that ends up being the move, I think you can get really behind that. I mean, he coached the Super Bowl defense in Los Angeles. I thought what he did last year with the Atlanta defense was really good. There's a lot of good names. You can't go wrong with Jim Schwartz or Jim Leonard for my money also. Another super chat here. For those who don't know why Keon Coleman was the pick, Brady already gave you the keys. He is from the Peyton tree. He saw Colston in him. I understand it. Marquise Colston, who also played kind of like that Keenan Allen big slot role back in New Orleans when Brady was there. That's a good comp.
Yeah, that's a great comp. And if the Bills can even get a third of that type of production, I think they would be very happy with that with Keon Coleman. Previous super chats, both Schwartz is a very aggressive DC. We've seen that in the NFL. Leonard was very aggressive when he was the head coach at Wisconsin, interim head coach, and then he was also the DC there. I think both of those guys are really good. Raheem Morris just has a long history of really good defenses. If you can get any of those three, I think that would be a huge get for Joe Brady and would just bring more and more fans maybe to that, winning back even more of them, because I know we've had some comments here saying, well, they didn't win me back yet. If you keep adding to this coaching staff, which Brandon Beane acknowledged, that's why you couldn't necessarily wait for some of these coaches that are still coaching leading up to the Super Bowl, because it's hard to fill a staff that way. If he can get the right guys on this staff, it's going to be a lot easier to get people on board.
It is a couple injury updates from the Bills today. Obviously, Josh Allen in a walking boot and crutches ended up having a procedure on his foot. He broke his fifth metatarsal, which, funny enough, I know just how he's feeling, because that's the bone that I broke in my right foot here, included in the sprain that I had. Ryan, I got to tell you some breaking news. I'm in for hoops tomorrow.
Oh, my.
I'm going to give it a run. Is this craziness?
Give it a jog. Don't give it a run. Give it a jog.
I'm going to give it a jog. I'm going to go probably at like 50, 60%. I was running around with the kids at baseball the other night. I was feeling really good. So I'm getting adventurous. And we're going to see how – because I figure – if I do something crazy to it again, at least I'll have some time before the next time I have to travel, like the combine or something. So we'll just see. But I miss it, man. I love hooping in the morning. But yeah, he broke his fifth metatarsal. He said it was an old injury that the doctor went in, cleaned it up, He said if he had to play today, even though he was in a boot, crutching around the facility, that he could play if he had to play today, which typical Josh Allen answer. But a significant update there. He'll be fine by the start of the offseason program.
Great news there. 8 to 10 weeks generally for the healing process will be good for the offseason program, as you mentioned. But yeah, I believed him completely when he said if he had to play this upcoming weekend or in the Super Bowl, he'd be able to. If anyone would be able to find a way to fight through the pain, it would be Josh Allen, which we've seen over the years with multiple different ailments.
Terrell Bernard had a pretty significant ankle procedure done. So they expect him to make a full recovery, but obviously that hampered him all season long. And you could tell in his just demeanor how much that injury kind of took out of him. So another little note from Brandon in our 40-minute session, he does think that there's some versatility to his game, and that if a new defensive coordinator comes in and sees him more as an outside linebacker, that's something that they could potentially pursue. So that's definitely something to watch. And then probably the biggest injury update is, we have not had an update on Dorian Strong for months since he left with a neck injury. Brandon said his future is very much unknown. His football future is very much unknown. It is a serious deal. He's currently trying to decide if he's going to have a procedure that, depending on how it goes, would determine whether or not he can play football again. So it's a tough situation for the Bills' rookie cornerback. We'll see how that kind of plays out over the next couple of months. But you think about Tre'Davious White, a free agent. They lost Jamarcus Ingram. I don't know if they're going to want to bring Dane Jackson back, a staple of Sean McDermott's defenses. You could be looking at Benford, Maxwell Hairston. Dorian Strong is not playing football anymore. Cornerback all of a sudden becomes something that you probably have to address pretty seriously. And it just so happens, I think this Senior Bowl class has a ton of cornerbacks that I think Bills fans can start watching.
Yeah, absolutely. And whoever they hire is the DC, whoever they hire is the cornerbacks coach, because Jamil Adai left today for a job with the Dolphins. They might have ties to players that are free agents that they can bring in and fit into their system. It's not all bad news necessarily, but in the case of Dorian Strong, you feel awful for the kid. Any kid that's a rookie in this league and suffers an injury like that where their career could already be over. But man, Matt, the promise that he showed at times this summer when he was on the field early this year, you could see that he had a lot of talent, and the Bills looked like maybe they had another hidden gem with a day 3 pick. I just hope he can live a long, healthy life, whether that's with football or not, without any pain in his neck. But if he's able to come back and play the game of football, that'd be phenomenal. I'd love to see him continue to develop and see what that looks like.
I think that's going to do it for this episode of Shout. I hope everybody has a great rest of your week. We will be back before the end of the week with at least one more, putting together some different things. Actually, before we get out of here, the Bills reportedly are hiring a new offensive line coach.
Mm-hmm.
So the first coach that the Bills are bringing into Joe Brady's staff, Pat Mayer. He was the offensive line coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers the last couple of years. Very much a connection of Aaron Kromer, was on the staff with him in Chicago. So obviously, I think Joe Brady was with him and also in Carolina. Yeah. A lot of good things I'm hearing. At first I was thinking about the Pittsburgh offensive line the last couple of years and how bad it's kind of been, but apparently he's done some really good work developing some of the guys in that room. And this year was his best coaching job to date. I've heard some really impressive things about him in the last 2 hours. So I'm looking forward to kind of diving into this, but this is a guy that I think can be kind of a natural fit to take over for Aaron Kromer.
Pass blocking, they were great. I've watched some videos of him already talking about wanting to create a shell with his offensive line so his quarterbacks can drop back, up to 9 to 10 yards, but also step up in the pocket about 6 yards to deliver the ball. So some good philosophies. Did a really nice job with Zach Frazier in Pittsburgh. That line really came together as the year went on, and I saw some people on in Pittsburgh, bloggers, things like that, saying that unit may have been the best unit on the team over the second half of the season in terms of their overall play. So that's promising. You don't usually think, at least as of late, of Pittsburgh's offensive lines being anything fantastic, but he did a really nice job this year with that unit.
Head over to Amtrak.com, one of the sponsors of the Shout podcast. They have you covered for all of your travel needs, always with some great deals and 50% off for kids. Can't beat that. No middle seats, no baggage fees. It's the way to travel stress-free. All right, for Ryan Talbot, I'm Matt Parrino. We will be back with you very shortly. Enjoy the rest of your week.